The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone, my name is Claire Smith and a very warm welcome to you all, whether this is your first time attending or you're joining us for the sixth and final session in the series, Connecting Dam with the Enterprise with Teresa Regley. Today's session, Building a Strategy for Dam Integration, combines your knowledge from the previous sessions to walk you through how to build a dam integration strategy step by step. After Teresa's presentation, there'll be 25 minutes for Q&A. Please send through your questions at any point during this session in the questions box on the right-hand side panel of your GoToWebinar screen. And don't forget that a recording of this session, along with links to all previous sessions, will be sent to you tomorrow so you can view again at your own pace. Now it's my great pleasure to pass you over to our course leader, Teresa Regley. Thank you, Teresa.
Thank you, Claire. Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here and thanks for joining the last session in the series. I almost can't believe that it's about to come to a close. It's been, needless to say, quite a bit of work to put it all together, but I'm really pleased that we had so many people join and that you've given me so much great feedback. And Claire will be sending out a survey tomorrow, getting more feedback on the sessions, and I would really encourage all of you, please, to give your feedback. This is educational material that I'll use in the future, and it will benefit the industry as a whole and future conferences, etc. So please feel free to contribute to that feedback. I'd really appreciate it. So getting into the last session here is around building a strategy for dam integration, and this was a fun way to bring together some of the greatest hits from many strategy engagements that I've done over the years, and sort of modernize it all and present it to you today. So to Claire's point, this is part 6, so we're almost done here, and all the other sessions are now available via recording. So please feel free to go back to those and listen to them again, and do continue to send me questions as you listen and re-listen to these sessions. So here's what I've chosen to cover today, and it was interesting to think about how do I talk about building a dam integration strategy in 50 minutes or so, and I came up with what I thought were the 9 most important steps. There's of course probably more sub steps to these particular items, but these to me are the 9 most important things to building a successful dam integration strategy. And I'll go through them one by one, give you some examples, and again, I've sort of culled these from some of the largest companies in the world that I've developed dam strategies for, and even adapted some of the smaller organization approaches, so you get an idea of how you might approach a dam strategy or updating your dam strategy if you're going to tackle that in 2020. Hard to believe we're heading into a new decade. So developing a dam integration strategy, first of all, should actually begin with your business strategy. And this is something that I find really amusing, that many organizations, they say, well, I need a dam strategy. And I say, well, what's your business strategy? Or what's the high level goals of your business? They find it somewhat odd that I actually insist on starting there. So you should have, of course, a very constant or at least consistent business strategy. Normally, businesses will develop strategies that go out, maybe on a 2 to 4, sometimes 5-year horizon, and you need to base your dam strategy on that. So it's the tactics that will vary in response to the market need, the competitive threat, the technology, etc. So thinking first about what your overall business strategy is, you need, of course, to understand, okay, why, what, and how. And if your dam is principally about marketing, your CMO, of course, is going to be instrumental in developing this particular strategy. So this should inform your dam strategy, and it should ensure future alignment. So once you look at this overall business strategy, you need to look at it through the lens of marketing. So there's an asterisk there because in most cases, DAM's primary purpose is marketing. But if you're using it to manage principally content, or you're a content provider and you charge for that content, it might be a little bit different. So you might be looking at it through the lens of editorial or content development. So it really depends what the purpose of your DAM is, and kind of hone in on what that particular view of the business strategy is through that lens, and then identify your requirements based on that. So it's not just about what a dam would necessarily do out of the box, but what does it functionally have to support? This is where you then develop your why, what, and how for your dam strategy specifically, and you can specifically even align each requirement to those particular items. So once you get this together, you need to put appropriate detail together for your organization, so that then you have the flexibility to say, okay, here's what the tactics are probably going to be over the next usually year to 18 months. But then you're going to constantly be reviewing those tactics. And one of the key takeaways that I hope you get out of this particular course and this particular last session is that DAM is not a project, and DAM integration in particular is not a project, it is a program. And I saw that Dan Looper of Henry Stewart just sent out the promo about my keynote in New York next year. And it's really about developing a sustainable ecosystem for our DAM systems. It's not just a product, it's not just a project, it's not just a point-to-point integration, it's an overall ongoing ecosystem that we have to build and support. So that all ties back to the business strategy. So when it comes to your vision, I'll take you back to the definition in the first session that we had a couple months ago, which is, what is your DAM 2.0 or 3.0? And that's about creating value through integration. This is why we need to integrate DAM with other systems and why we need to integrate it throughout the enterprise. We're trying to use digital assets more intelligently, largely in personalized or targeted ways. So I'll give you an example of sort of what I would call a mashup of a vision statement that I took from a number of different recent client vision statements. On a yearly basis, I help usually about a dozen clients write a vision statement for their DAM. So here's some key words that tend to be in a DAM vision statement. The idea of being a central marketing asset repository for the entire enterprise. Oftentimes partners are involved in the vision statement. We need to have distribution-ready digital assets serving as a single source of truth for our users. And then that's usually extended to say, whether it's immediate or over time, that system needs to be integrated to both upstream and downstream systems. And then some goals. What is it facilitating? Findability, automation, speed to market. If you don't have this sort of vision statement for your DAM, you should. And you should really get your teams together to think about, what are you working towards? What are the requirements driving towards? And specifically, from an integration standpoint, what automation are you driving? How are people trying to find things? How are systems trying to find and use assets? And what are your KPIs for that speed to market? So all of this should tie back to the overall business strategy. So that's step one. Step two, I'll say, is forming the right team. And this is something that, frankly, is probably the biggest frustration I have with my job, is how easily and readily people spend very large amounts of money on technology, but they don't invest in the proper staff and the time allocation really required to be successful. And so when it comes to a strategy for integrating your DAM, forming the right team is infinitely more important than really anything else. So what does the strategic leadership do? This really needs to involve, senior levels and senior leaders. And I say this because oftentimes the integration piece, where you're deciding what to connect to and how to connect, usually isn't the DAM project team. You need the enterprise architect involved, you need high-level marketing leadership involved, and you need creative sponsorship involved. And if you're a very progressive organization, you hopefully have a data team as well, and that leader would be involved. So this is a group that usually meets on a monthly basis. You're setting the goals, you're setting the objectives, you're aligning the different business systems. And that's something that unfortunately is sorely lacking. And even the biggest organizations in the world that I work with, there's often no one at the top who's actually defining what needs to integrate with what and how. So making sure that cross-functional alignment exists is also extremely important. Then you need a steering committee, and this is a group that's really empowered to make the decisions. They would, of course, escalate to the strategic leadership in such cases where you'd have a situation that really needs a big decision maker. But this is the group that prioritizes the budgeting, the next steps for the project team, and of course does the cross-functional coordination and messaging across the whole enterprise. Now, of course, you're going to have an implementation team. And what I find, unfortunately, is a lot of implementation teams are only focused on the implementation, and they only have the launch as their endpoint, and they're not thinking about a sustainable program. So your implementation team is a diverse team of SMEs that are doing the analysis, that are doing the design, that are doing the configuration, they're writing the use cases, they're making sure that the technical and business implementation details are together, change management, migration, tech, data oversight, etc. So this is where these are the people really doing the everyday work. Now, ideally, these people do not go away when the system launches. And unfortunately, many of them in most enterprises do, where you might have a DAM project manager and then that project manager goes and manages something else. But what you really need is an operations team. And this is where DAM often falls apart, is that there's not an operation team where you'd need ongoing support, engagement, and improvement for business as usual. Training is something that sadly, oftentimes a vendor does it when the system launches, and then that vendor goes away. And there's not necessarily someone to train new users on an ongoing basis, where you might have dozens of new users per quarter coming onto the system. So making sure that that sustainability is in place, and making sure that someone is doing the championing of the system and what I like to call an internal marketing campaign is so important for integrating DAM with the enterprise. And the ongoing tech dev support that really should be just as internal as it should be support from the vendor. This is really where DAM succeeds over the long haul, is this operations team. So I see a lot of implementation teams. I see some loosely formed steering committees, but I very rarely see the necessary engagement from the very top and the very bottom on an ongoing basis. So if you're in it for the long haul, which of course I hope you all are, because all enterprises should be in DAM for the long haul, focus on the sustainable operations team and an engaged strategic leadership. Okay, so here's some more in-depth sort of best practice integration resource pictures, where of course you've got a project manager, but what I like to try to get every organization that I work with to do is to hire a full-time DAM manager. And I'm currently just yesterday got an email from a client who had their concept of what a full-time DAM manager would do. I shared some sample job descriptions, and they were having a hard time justifying hiring this person full-time. But this is the sort of things they would be doing. So if you think about asset migration and that ongoing training person who's onboarding new users, the metadata, of course, the librarian aspect, making sure that the day-to-day with the relationship with the vendor is fully engaged and continuous, making sure that user feedback is collected, looking at analytics. This person's really held accountable for continuous improvement, and that often will lead to, excuse me, managing integrations. Another role that often gets neglected is a change manager, and sometimes the DAM manager might have experience with change and implementing change, but this is particularly important during implementation, and then of course the integrations where assets might get shared with other systems. That change manager is often interfacing not just with users of the DAM, but with users of other systems to give them the information about, okay, here's what's going to come from the DAM, here's how you can use it, and here's how it can be effectively leveraged by that particular system. So this is not just about managing change with the DAM, it's about managing change at a larger scale that really relates to how it's going to integrate with other systems across the enterprise. Vendor resources are, of course, actually very important, and you want to make sure that you've got those 2 to 3 vendor resources that are usually involved with the implementation. But don't forget, and this is key for long-term integrations, is that you're likely going to need somebody who's an API specialist at the vendor who can really work with you to assist with integrating with your other enterprise systems. So you're going to have questions about the API. There's going to be documentation, and you might use that documentation, and it might be very good. But even in the best case scenario, the odds are very high that you're going to need someone who really knows that API inside and out to help you integrate DAM with other solutions. And then, of course, an enterprise architect, or later an internal technical admin, where as you think about where does DAM fit in the overall MarTech picture of the enterprise, and this is what we talked about in session 1 and what we brought back time and time again, DAM's part of the bigger picture. So that enterprise architect needs to be involved in the strategy from the beginning, and then oftentimes you'll have a technical admin. Now, the enterprise architect doesn't usually become the technical admin, but that transition is very important, where the knowledge of the enterprise architect in terms of how DAM is plugging in needs to be transferred to the person that will be technically maintaining the system over time. And then in particularly large organizations, this is especially true if you're a large multi-brand company, you need what I call content stewards. So this might be if you're say a large product company and you have 10 different brands, or you have 20 different divisions, you often need a brand owner of the DAM who's managing all the brand assets for that particular brand. So many large companies will outsource this to a third party, but it is again a key role for sustainability of your systems and integrating it across all the brands, all the systems, and especially at a global level. Okay, next, building your business case. So hopefully you have a vision, you formed the right team. Don't forget to build a business case. Many companies embark on a DAM endeavor and they don't even have a business case. So most of the organizations who embark on DAM, this is why they do. Right? They don't know what they have or they own. They don't know where it is. They don't know how to find it. They don't know what form it's in. They don't know the rights they have to it. They don't know how to locate it and get it delivered in the form they need when they need it. And they also don't know how to simultaneously push it in multiple forms to different channels. This is why most enterprises adopt DAM. So if you don't yet have a DAM and you're trying to justify it, here you go. Take these points to your boss, escalate it up. But then, of course, it's not that simple. You actually need to establish some KPIs or some goals that you're actually going to achieve. So usually when I develop a DAM business case, these are the three linchpins: efficiency, risk reduction, and value. Some of these are quantifiable, and some of them, especially the last one, are what I would call value oriented. They're not necessarily countable. You can't put them in an ROI spreadsheet. But efficiency is a big one where I would say that every organization that seeks a DAM, they do because they feel like they can't find anything or things take too long. So reducing cost is a good ROI metric. However, of course, you might spend $500,000 setting up the system. So that ROI needs to be thought of in that context. But it's important to establish a benchmark here. What does efficiency mean? So you can't just say we're going to be faster. You need to say today it takes 5 weeks to get a new product campaign to market, and we want to reduce it to 2.5 as an example. Reducing frustration is huge as well. I had one client earlier this year who said they had an employee quit because they hated using the DAM so much. You don't want to be in that situation. You don't want your team to have that level of frustration. Reducing risk is huge. There's classic stories about the wrong version of the logo being used or the wrong picture of the product, etc. So those kinds of things, if you have had those occasions where things have gone wrong or the wrong asset's been used, that's definitely a good approach as well. But then, of course, enhanced value. And this is one of the biggest payoffs of DAM. Unfortunately, it's not very quantifiable, so it doesn't really look good on an ROI spreadsheet. But when we think about being able to create more value, brand equity, and when you think about a DAM business case, these often dominate because we think about how can we improve our brand management, how can we improve our brand perception. But this typically hinges on these asset and process improvements. So make sure that, as I pointed out with the team, you're really having to drive system adoption for everything above it to be successful and to really happen. So to take the automation piece to the next level, you need to think about what your operational model is. So I often see a driver for DAM being around a distributed operational model where somebody says, well, we want to have the creatives in the field or the marketers in the field to have the authority to control and manage their own digital assets. So that's something that should speed that up. However, there's other sorts of companies that say, no, we want to be more centralized and we want to make sure that we control actually a little bit more what marketers and creative teams are doing by not giving them too much freedom to mess things up and to make sure that they're only allowed to use this particular version of the logo or this particular picture of the product. So think about what you're driving towards, because it's not a black and white thing in terms of what efficiency means in a DAM ROI model. And then, of course, reducing production effort and time, shortening time to market, possibly reducing cost. These are all things you have to measure and figure out before you can really deliver your business case. So here's some typical benchmarks and KPIs. Cycle time for the current system. So as I mentioned, maybe it takes 5 weeks to get a new product campaign out. How can you make that easier and quicker? Multi-system or multi-channel delivery of assets. So during this course, we've talked about DAM as a service. That, of course, is a huge win if you can make the assets available to other systems without a human being having to do that. The facility of working with external partners and third parties. This is huge, especially for organizations that are, for example, having to pay their agencies every time they want a digital asset. I had one client a few years ago who saved over $300,000 a year just by housing their own assets in their own DAM and not having to go to agencies all the time and say, can you provide me with this asset from this date because I don't have it anymore. So thinking about these sorts of KPIs, this is what will help you be successful out of the gate. And it's also a year after you launch the DAM, 2 years after you launch the DAM, you can go back and say, this is the way it was. You can have it all documented, and then you can hopefully impress your boss, get a raise, and get promoted. Here's some more specific tangible objectives that I invite you to use and leverage and potentially define your next levels of DAM, where we've got the employee productivity, accelerating the pace of whatever's causing your latency. It might be geographic, it might be just process. Improving internal visibility and transparency. Transparency is a big word with DAM as well. Just, do we know what we have? Do we know where it is? Improving knowledge sharing, better collaboration with third parties, business agility, cross-segment business opportunities, et cetera, et cetera. You know, many things that I hope you can take out of this. And even if you already have a DAM and you didn't do a business case, if you want to be more successful in the future, do this. You know, get this together. Look at it now and keep striving to improve. So as you're building your model, make sure you don't assume. You need to go out to the field. You need to talk to people. You need to communicate with the stakeholders. You need to develop these metrics and these KPIs. And then you need to validate and you need to realign. So this might be going back and adjusting that tactical part of the plan. And it's about revisions, because as you learn and as you go, this is typical of, you know, agile processes, you revise and you improve and you make it better. Okay, so you've got a vision, you've got the right team, you've got your business case. What's next? You need to define your internal and external customer journeys, and that's what drives you to pick your right tools. So internal customer journeys are about the users of the DAM system themselves. So this is your marketers and your agencies and your partners, et cetera. And that needs to support external customer journeys. So the external customer journey, of course, is who's your customer, how do they interact with you, and what do they need? So the internal journeys have to support the external journeys, and that drives the tool selection. So here's an image from our friends at Real Story Group, and you can see here, this is exactly what this is depicting, is that the inside circle is the external customer journeys, and then outside we have the different systems that support those customer journeys, those external customer journeys. So you hopefully have written about your personas and your use cases, and you know what you are driving for and trying to support your customers to do. But where there's often a disconnect is what exactly are the business platforms that are driving those external customer journeys, and then how. And so the use case scenarios need to drive and support the external customer, or the external customer journey. I could spend probably an hour just talking about this graphic, but I think you understand the point. The external view, what does the customer have to do? And then we determine what does our DAM system have to do in order to support our customers who want to peruse images of our products or watch videos of our products, to transact with us and to make them feel like they belong to a community over the long haul. That's what you need to actually lay out and understand. So here's some typical internal DAM use cases. And I've of course extended this based on our discussions over the last couple of months during the course to include Content Hub use cases. So this isn't just the core DAM system. It's if you also have a Content Hub where you have perhaps PIM and rights and MRM integrated into the whole thing. So you might just need a photo library. You might be managing a brand. You might be building campaigns. You might have multi-channel distribution. Some of these are more people-oriented and some of them are more system-oriented. You might be producing a catalog or a magazine. You might say, I just want a headless DAM as a service so that all my downstream systems can access the right image at the right time and know it's the latest version and have all the metadata that it wants. You might be supporting some short-term advertising, or maybe you're a broadcaster and you want to do some broadcast media management. So these are different sorts of internal use cases that marketers and other team members might need to do. Now, the important thing and the interesting thing, and this goes into the next section about picking a product, is that different DAM vendors support, different scenarios with variable success. So there's a lot of DAM vendors out there that frankly just support photo libraries and brand management, maybe a little bit of campaign asset management. There's a huge proliferation of those vendors. They're all inexpensive software as a service tools, whereas these other ones tend to be more of what I would call the enterprise grade, especially these three in the middle here, the multi-channel distribution, print production, and headless DAM as a service, where you need to have an extremely sophisticated API. And then there's a whole different swath of vendors that are really good at supporting media. So know your use cases, know what your internal users need to do and what those systems need to support. So the external use cases supported by the internal use cases. And then, of course, you're building it into this hub. So I think this is the fourth time I've showed this image during the course. But they say in education, you need to hear something at least 3 times, or you need to see something at least 3 times in order to get it into your head. So I've done it. This is the 4th time to put it in here, because you're building. This is essentially a set of internal use cases here, where we've got the users, the marketing users, who are creating and managing and collaborating and searching and downloading and sharing and really putting this into a larger hub. So you need to describe, when you're going out and thinking about your DAM strategy, whether you want to have a better current implementation or whether you want to change your vendor. I always say this is an ongoing thing. It's having use cases updated every year. It's kind of like taking your spouse out on date night. You can't just think because you're married that it's easy and you don't have to do the work. It's just like that with your DAM tool. It has to be an ongoing program where every year you're thinking about what use cases am I supporting and how do I update my requirements and how do I work with my team and my vendor to really continue to make this a sustainable program. So update your use cases. I was really excited last week when I had one of my clients say, we want you to update our DAM use cases in 2020. And I said, that's awesome, because that's the way everybody should be thinking. Even though they already have a DAM and they already have a DAM manager and they have a team, they want to update their use cases and get better. So keep thinking about that and do it in 2020. So when it comes to picking a tool, I have to show Scott Brinker's big slide. I'm sure you've all seen it. When it comes to picking a tool, of course, there's this massive, massive market of marketing technology, and DAM and MRM are this tiny little circle here where there's just thousands and thousands of tools. The DAM market is a couple hundred. It's small by comparison. What I tend to see is that organizations, they want to buy the big, shiny spaceship. And I have to say that probably only about 25% of the organizations I work with really need the spaceship, where they're at a level of sophistication that they're ready to do this multi-system integration. They're ready to build DAM as a service. They've got a huge team to support that. And that's usually the biggest companies in the world, mostly CPGs, who are the most advanced from a marketing perspective. And CPG is consumer product goods, by the way. I used that acronym a couple days ago and somebody didn't know what it meant, so I just wanted to clarify. So I would say just make sure that if you think you need a spaceship, you might not. You might just need like a Mini Cooper or a bicycle. And odds are, if you're new to DAM, you've probably never even ridden the bicycle. So this is why the use cases are so important. You might be able to spend 1/5 of what you think you need to, because it's going to take you 2 years just to centralize your assets properly. So don't overbuy. Don't buy a Ferrari when all you need to do is walk down the street to get some milk. But you need to decide what systems will own what. So in the creative integration with the creative application session, which was session 2, I brought this up, but I didn't have very much time to talk about it because that session went quite a bit over. But this is part of the decision-making process that happens when you are working with your architect team and with the implementation team and with the vendor, is thinking about what systems are going to own which steps along the ecosystem. So when you do your tool selection or when you're updating your strategy next year, when you're updating your use cases, and this is, like I said, this is important even if you already have a DAM, you might make a shift. You might decide, okay, we've had this top sort of approach for the last 3 years where we've had some of these best of breed tools, but oh, our vendor has evolved, our vendor has added a PIM to their product suite, or they've added DRM, or they have a partnership with Fidel or some other DRM company. And so maybe we can actually expand the scope of what our DAM is doing. And this is especially something you should be thinking about at least every 18 months to 2 years, ideally on an annualized basis. But revisit, is the scope of my DAM what it should be? Do I need to change it? And if I'm going to change it, do I have the right vendor to do that? And think of it in terms of the whole ecosystem, not just in terms of the core DAM functions. Okay, next couple of steps are around defining your boxes and arrows and aligning data across systems. So what do I mean by defining your boxes and arrows? Well, this takes us back to on-prem solution partners graphic that I showed very briefly in session 1. And when it comes to integrating DAM successfully in the enterprise, it's not just defining the ecosystem, it's defining the flow among the different systems in the ecosystem. So when we think about, we talked about this in the data integration session, odds are product data is not going to originate in your DAM, and people aren't going to be filling in product data from scratch in your DAM. You should have a situation where that would be sourced in a PIM from a product team so that your marketers do not have to copy paste that somehow. And then that data is integrated, via some kind of API or microservices, and there's a constant flow and exchange of data. So this is the sort of graphic that gets thrown up in a lot of meetings on a screen, and everybody nods and said, yes, this is great. But the devil is in the details, in that what is coming from one of these columns and going into another one of the columns. And I mean that on a field by field basis. How do you actually break that down field by field? And then, of course, ultimately, who's going to do that? Who's going to own those data exchanges? Because some systems have certain APIs that are better at listening and pulling versus pushing. And you'll have to, again, going back to that detail about APIs, you're going to have API specialists who are going to be able to broker those conversations between systems and set up those conversations between systems. And that all has to happen at an extremely detailed level. This is key for the successful integration of DAM with other systems. And then, of course, aligning the data. What often happens is that when people go to align or define the arrows, when they're looking at this and they're defining the arrows, then they discover that you've got this situation on the left, where you have one repository that has a different data model from another repository that has different field names. So you have to do a mapping where you take the particular name of a field in one system and align it with the name of the field in another system. That way the systems can more easily exchange the data. You've defined your boxes and arrows, but now the systems can exchange that data more seamlessly and frankly just not get confused. Because if it's called description in one and notes in the other, then they won't be able to align, or the API won't be able to align those fields without a lot of manual effort and cleanup. So making sure you align those data fields is key. Okay, next up, deploy in realistic agile waves. Let's not boil the ocean. I know that's a cliche, but it's a very important cliche. So this is usually a typical DAM 2.0 roadmap. And you'll note that the first thing I put for successful DAM integration is the foundation. Stage 1 should be a defined governance and operating model. It is not run out and buy a system or complain about the system we have and buy a new one. It's very much operational. So to my point of number 2, making sure that you have the right team in place, that's the group that does the strategic planning, where the ownership and accountability is set forth. You have adequate resources. You've got the right education, training, and business change management. You got to get all that in place if you're going to integrate successfully across the enterprise. Then I say, well, usually you need to think about, do I have actually the right platform to do all this? So making sure you have a modern enterprise DAM that's scalable, fit for purpose, that can globally manage, store, share assets, both internally and externally. And then this is where I see stage 3 is where I see right now the largest companies in the world, is they're trying to build a central marketing content hub where they've got key elements of the PIM, the DRM, the MRM all together, tailoring the views to the individual users, the individual brands, the individual geographies, and then integrating that management for that experience management for marketers. So this content hub has largely been driven by those internal use cases that have been developed and really grown up over the years. And then finally, evolution. So this is where you're integrating DAM into the marketing technology ecosystem. This is where you've defined your boxes and arrows. This is where your APIs are busily working together, integrating downstream, upstream, and making sure you've got end-to-end consistent data and user experience. So making sure that you have this roadmap and sort of know where you are in this roadmap. This is typically, just depending on where you are, 18 months to 2 years. It's not quick. It's not quick. And sadly, again, I often see this sort of stalling between stage 2 and stage 3. So as you build your strategy, the long-term sustainability very much happens around this stage 3, and when you're defining growth and you're picking the team that's going to drive that growth. Okay, governance. Governance, of course, extremely important for integrating DAM successfully at the enterprise. So I say the governance team is usually synonymous with a sort of combination of the steering committee and a couple members of the operations team. You'll notice I didn't say the implementation team because governance is not something that long-term is run by an implementation team. It's run by a committee that sets the standards, that codifies the standards, that disseminates those standards, and then makes sure that they're implemented, enforced, and over the long haul, evaluated, reviewed, and revised. So you can set up a governance policy, and you can't just then let it sit there. You have to continue and really work on it and make sure that it's a continuous improvement. So usually the DAM manager or director, depending on the level of experience of this person, is really owning and enforcing these standards and making sure that people are, of course, educated to know what they are, but then also following the subsequent steps to make sure that they're adopted over the long haul. So integration success is not just technical. This is a great slide from the team at ICP. And ICP runs a lot of these sustainable DAM programs for some of the largest companies in the world. And I like the way that they use this 5 A's is what they call the sort of change management methodology within an agile environment. So when you're thinking about integration success for the long haul, alignment, action, adjusting, adopting, and then adapting. So it's a lot of 1 and 2 happens generally, where people say, okay, we're aligned. We know we're going to launch this system. We've got the leadership commitment. We've signed the checks. Okay, that's all great. We've got the resources. You deploy the system. You've got that project team has initiated the rollout and all that good stuff's happening. But then, of course, the adjustment is where it really gets difficult. Getting the money and the leadership behind it, getting the system set up is the easy part. So the adjusting, where you think about, okay, we're migrating things into a new system, we have to adjust our business process around it, we have to make sure our operating model is in the right place, and promoting new ways of working. This is where those roles that I talked about of change managers are really key for success. And then that's what drives the adoption. So we think about not just implementing the new technology, but adopting a new way of working at a large scale and reinforcing, and you have to reward the behavior. You have to reward the new behavior. I'm going to add that to the slide here where it says reinforce and reward the new behavior for people who are successfully following the new standards and the new ways of working. And then, of course, you need to adapt. So just like I mentioned, you should be reviewing and looking at your DAM use cases on an annual basis. You need to adapt and make sure that your new business process and your technology is really maximized over the long term. And then when change management adjustments are necessary, make sure that you do it. And here's a nice visualization of that. So when you think about integration success being not just technical, it's about supporting user adoption. It's about raising awareness of a project and creating momentum and buzz. It's about communication. It's about making sure that when something goes well, that you let everybody know, and just communicating the key events and the milestones to support the success. So I talked about those arrows and the boxes, but this is just as important, is to have somebody who's really out there owning the system, communicating and making sure that that all of it continues to get revised and updated. So if I blow out the structure here, where I had the senior leadership, the steering committee, the implementation team, the operations team, here's some of the roles, the specific roles that end up on at these different levels. And I see a lot of IT leadership, brand leadership, and marketing leadership, but I often don't see MarTech specific technical leadership because there's just not a lot of people out there with that experience, but there's a lot of job opportunities these days, and a lot of these roles really should be created where we have MarTech leaders. And also just marketing operations. So marketers tend to want to be marketers, and they don't want to tend to necessarily run operations. So being able to have people with these specific focal points at the strategic level and at the steering committee level, I believe really drives better decisions and operations down here at the implementation and the operations level. So this might look like, wow, that's a lot of people. But this is modeled after, large global companies, but this is what I see be successful. And really, if you took all the salaries here, it probably wouldn't add up to the cost of what they're spending on the technology itself. So again, let's put the money just as much towards people, if not more towards people and resources than we do towards the software companies that frankly charge a lot for their licenses. Okay. All right. So wrapping up here, and then I'm happy to take some questions. So DAM integration success is not just a technical challenge to be solved, right? We need to think about qualified people and alignment and change management, and that has to be an ongoing exercise. It is not a moment in time. It is an ongoing exercise. A unified vision and use cases are definitely the North Star in terms of strategic direction, and you need to keep your eye on that, and you need to update them, ideally on an annual basis, where you are saying, again, are we still going towards the right North Star? Do we need to update the North Star, and if so, how, and who are the right people to do that? And only with the right team and vision in place can you properly define those boxes and arrows and that North Star. So a well-staffed and very sustainable approach to connecting DAM to the enterprise is what really is going to drive adoption and success over the long haul. So again, sustainability over the long haul. So I'm happy to take questions now. And before I do, since this is the last session, of course, I will say, let me know if I can help you in 2020. That's perhaps a very ambitious statement because I'm already completely booked in Q1. But if you need help updating your DAM strategy or your product or your data models or your governance model, I'd be happy to chat with you about that in 2020. And from there, I will hand it over to Claire to ask questions. Please put your questions into the window on the right-hand side if you haven't already.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Teresa, for a great presentation and indeed a great series. Do keep sending us your questions, as Teresa mentioned. You can do that in the question bar on the right-hand side of your GoToWebinar panel, and we'll try to get to as many as possible in the remaining time that we've got. So while Teresa takes a few minutes, I just wanted to let you know about our next online webinar series titled Managing Metadata for DAM in the Enterprise with John Horodisky. John is a leading metadata expert, and this series will cover everything you need to know about utilizing metadata and taxonomies in your DAM, from workflow and stewardship to building your metadata strategy. And you can find out more about that series on our website. We also have our latest complimentary webinar happening on December 11th, and that's the last one for 2020. It's called 5 Surprising Ways to Supercharge Your DAM, and in that we'll explore the things outside of technology or functionality that make the difference between DAM success and DAM failure. We also have a host of other complimentary webinars in our archive on our website, and if you'd like to be kept up to date on all things DAM, you can find us on LinkedIn under the group Henry Stewart DAM. Okay, so now let's take some questions. The first one we've got is, how important is executive sponsorship? What level needs to advocate for the DAM?
Well, executive sponsorship is super important, and I'm glad to say that I see more and more executives engaged in digital asset management, and I see it moving up the chain. So when I first started working in DAM about 12, 13 years ago, it was usually a marketing department or an image manager or somebody who just didn't have a lot of power, so to speak. And DAM wasn't seen as a real driver of enterprise success or marketing success. Now I've very frequently have a VP at least assigned to the strategy project. And that's great. I would say that in recent years, it was more sort of a director of digital strategy or a director of marketing. That's another shift that's been really interesting, where before my client would be a director of marketing, but now it's often somebody who's a director of marketing technology or broader marketing strategy or digital strategy as a whole. And then often there's a VP of marketing involved or a VP of digital involved. So that's the level it's at in most organizations now. And that's really important because it's director level or above that can sign the checks. But usually it's that VP level that is owning a bigger picture. And that's also the person who can say, we need the enterprise architect on that, and the one that can actually assign the broader resources that are more enterprise focused versus departmentally focused to the project in the right way. So that's it not only is important, but it's moving up the chain. I sometimes, very rarely, get a CMO who's actually engaged in a DAM project, but usually they just fly in and say, a half hour of big statements and then they leave, but that's what most C-level people tend to do anyway. So that's okay, but it's nice that occasionally I get a CMO who knows what a DAM is and is engaged.
Great. So the next question, I really like the references to building a right team for a successful DAM. Currently, we only have one full-time member that manages the DAM in my company. Have you ever helped an organization to put across a business case for resources?
Yes, I have, and recently more than ever, which is good. So I did this for a performing arts organization earlier this year, and of course you can imagine the money is very tight with the performing arts organization, but it's usually full of risk. Those particular business cases where you're talking about the long-term ramifications of not having that person to maintain the system, and not having the metadata assigned on a regular basis, and not what goes wrong if there's no one to do these particular things. And so I've definitely had to put together those business cases, and in some cases I've quantified those things. And sometimes when those things get quantified, it's a bit arbitrary, but there's been other organizations I've worked with where they really they can put a number on the cost of what it takes to email around files and nobody knows where it is and how much time is lost, etc. So yes, that's something I've definitely done, and I think you can do as well. And in some ways, there's probably places that you could look for where this thing shouldn't be spent, that should be put towards resources, and that's often part of the argument.
Okay, great. So the next question's keeping with the people theme. What specific people should be making the decisions about what systems should own what in the DAM ecosystem?
So that's a tough question. I guess it depends on the system. I think that there's a definite need for an enterprise architect to be making those decisions. Because they ideally would know functionally what each system in the ecosystem does best. And they would also have particular owners of those systems who could speak to the functional richness of the API and which ones would be better at playing which roles. But then there also needs to be some users, of course, users of different systems who can weigh in on what's best from a usability standpoint for certain tasks. And that's what has to be balanced, really, is what the users think is best for something, a particular task, and then from systematically, from a back-end perspective, what's best for certain functions, and then have a meeting of the minds and determine what system should do what based on that.
Okay, great. Our next question, how can you focus on a DAM that is particularly good at one of the use cases, for example, media management, while trying to convince everyone else in the enterprise, example, marketing teams, that integration is a good thing?
That's a tough one too. This is why I tend to see a lot of multiple dams in some enterprises, and there's, just to give you an example, I think that you can't necessarily convince everybody to use one dam, especially if you have a very media-heavy part of your organization, and then you have very marketing-intensive use cases that have nothing to do with that media, and that's okay. What I've seen is some use of metadata cross system, so that people know what is in the other system by searching in either one. So building kind of a reference index and doing it that way. I also see sometimes people going back to the market, eliminating the two, and then buying one that's good enough in both areas. And that's something you can really only do in the last, I would say, 2 to 3 years. So if you're in a situation where you've had those two dams for a while, you might want to go back to the market, because there are some mid-market dams that are really good at managing short-form video. So if we're talking about advertising and short-form web video and things like that, there's systems that do that as well as they do brand management. So if you do, this is a perfect time to update your use cases and your strategy, and think about potentially going back to the market and looking at what's new.
Great, thank you. So we just have 2 more questions left. Anyone else who wants to send something in, please do so, and we'll get to it today. So the next one, how do you go about creating use cases?
Well, there's books on this. There's a lot of books on this. The best thing to do when it comes to use cases, and this is a very sort of high-level overview of how I do it, is I ask potential end users of the dam. So this would be marketers, creative producers, agency people, etc. I ask them to bring their assets to the party being the meeting, and I tell them to walk me through the story of their asset, their specific asset. I don't like to, it's not good to talk in abstractions. It's much better to say, here's some assets that I built recently, and this is how they got created, and this is the journey they went through. And then think about what those pain points are, and then have that person describe what is the ideal state. How should this happen in the future? And this is something that, again, even if we've had a dam for 2 or 3 years, it's worth revisiting this, and it's worth asking these questions again on a regular basis. And so from that, you write down what their ideal state is, and then of course, ideally, you have someone who is a dam expert who can actually tell you, well, you could also plug this in, because dams also do this, and they also could do that, and to help you make that leap as an organization. So I often have some of my clients, they just will buy like 4 hours of my time, and they'll say, I already wrote the use cases. I've used dams. I can write a use case. And I say, awesome. And they send them to me, and then they say, but based on the latest functionality in the market, or based on the vendor that we don't have, what else could we expect a dam system to do that would make these use cases even better, that would improve these use cases? So I'm, of course, a big advocate for that last step, because it's partially how I make my living, but it's also, I think, part of what pulls an organization into the future, and thinking about how you can dream bigger beyond the current implementation you have. And then that all has to get documented. And then, of course, that's what drives future requirements, and that's what drives a spec, and potentially you go to your existing vendor or a new vendor to evolve.
Great. Another question's come through. So without boiling the ocean, when looking at vendors for building DAM 1.0, what should we be looking for if we are also thinking big picture DAM 2.0?
Yeah, if you're DAM 1.0, meaning you don't have a DAM yet, you're going to spend 18 months to 2 years just getting your first system set up, migrating all your assets, probably they're on hard drives or SharePoint or whatever they might be, into the system, training and rollout. And just it's such a dramatic change just to get a DAM. And then what you should focus on for the long term, thinking about DAM 2.0, is what are the systems that you're going to want to integrate over the long haul, and then secondarily pick a vendor that is very focused on their API. And every vendor will say that they're focused on their API, but this is for your technical team to actually look at the documentation, do some testing, and specifically even test some integrations with whether it's the systems using today or tomorrow. So I wrote a use case just yesterday for a client that I asked them, what are the downstream email marketing tools that you're using to develop marketing campaigns or email marketing campaigns? And they said, well, we've got a whole bunch, but we know that we're all moving to Salesforce Marketing Cloud. So they haven't done that yet, but we wrote the use case specifically to describe an integration with Salesforce Marketing Cloud, even though that's not what they're going to do in the first wave. It's the long-term plan. So making sure that you have that in your future state, and as you're thinking about driving towards the future, that's the best way to plan for DAM 2.0, even if you're just going for 1.0. And that was the case with this particular organization. They have no DAM yet. So that's the long-term use case view.
Okay, great. And how long should you expect your DAM to last before thinking about overhauling?
Very good question. It's really variable depending on the organization and how kind of what wave you were in. So I have found that a lot of organizations that were in the first wave of buying DAMs, and I say that like late 90s, early 2000s, their DAMs lasted 10, even 12 years. And that was because the market didn't evolve very much in that first decade. What really blew everything up was when the cloud erupted and everything moved to the web browser. And then in that case, there was this massive rush to move to a web-based DAM that was cloud-based. And so if you're still, for example, on-premise, and you have the servers in your basement and you're using a Java thick client, which that's still the case actually with one of my clients that I'm working with right now, then it's time to move on. It's really time to move on. However, if you bought a DAM 4 years ago or 5 years ago and you bought one of the newer generation DAMs that was already SaaS, that was already in the cloud, and that didn't have a Java client, and everything was configurable on the web, and that didn't require a lot of coding, and came with an API to start, then you probably don't need to renew it as readily as you would if you were in a different situation. So really depends on your current state, when you bought a DAM and what DAM you bought. And then of course, what's your situation? You might be starting a huge new MarTech initiative. You might be starting a massive new digital transformation project, and you need a different DAM to support what you're doing. I've got 2 big CPG clients right now who are now thinking about their DAM supporting their packaging. So that's a big change. So those sorts of factors will play into whether or not your DAM is going to last 4 or 5 years versus 7 or 10.
Okay, great. So this is the last question. If anything else has come into your mind, do put that in the question box and we will answer it today. So Teresa, is data alignment a project or an ongoing effort? If the latter, how many people?
It's a project, but then it should be a team. A bit like the model that I showed for the long-term sustainability of a DAM team. Think about your implementation team that might be tasked with aligning data. So that's usually called a master data team. Think about doing that as an initial effort, but then you're sort of being agile about it. You're aligning more and more data sources over time and bringing them in more and more over time. And it's a long-term sustainable practice, data alignment and master data management. So I would say project first, but then it's a program.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much, Teresa, for a great final session in the Connecting DAM with the Enterprise series. A link to access the recording of this and previous sessions will be sent to all attendees tomorrow. Thank you for joining us, everyone, and we hope to see you on the next series soon.